What is the best whiskey for under $100? What are 5 whiskeys in my collection I would replace straight away as soon as they run out? And why do I like Scotch more than bourbon? And what is the best alternative to a Macallan? These are some of the great questions that you guys have sent in when I asked you guys on Instagram and Discord and YouTube community and Patreon, and you guys have asked some juicy, interesting questions. I do think some of these answers will surprise you. The first question comes from Dave, and he has asked, what is your favorite sherry bomb? So I did a whole video on like the top 5 sherry bombs that you guys all sent in, but what's my favorite sherry bomb? The Glenallachie 10 cask strength. This is 58.1% and very, very sherry forward. I don't know if it's solely aged in sherry cask, but this is definitely a sherry forward whiskey. The other sherry bomb I really like is the Tamdhu cask strength, 59.8%. What is my favorite Arran? This is a hard question because I like a lot of Arrans. I would say the Arran 18 is overall my favorite. But even though it's my favorite, it's the one I'm actually not rebuying at the moment because it's got a lot more expensive. And that's just because Arran has done too well. They've almost been too successful that the stock of their 18-year-olds are running out. So the prices are going up. So I would say overall, my favorite Arran, the one I'm picking, I think it's good value. I'm going to replace it, will be the Arran Amarone cask. I talked about it in my Wine Explained video. Aging some red wine casks from Italy. It's bottled at 50%, unchill filtered, natural color, and has some really nice like chocolatey notes, Turkish delight notes. Fantastic. How long will a bottle of whiskey stay good for after opening and before opening? I've actually done a whole video on this. It's about, does whiskey go bad? If you had to choose only smoky or sherried whiskeys, which one for life? This is a juicy question. I think it would have to be smoky. What got me into Scotch was smoky whiskey. It's what's really different about Scotch. What is the best sub $100 single malt? My pick will be a pick that I have talked about a lot on this channel, maybe not so much recently, but I just really like this whiskey. Always goes down well. It's going to be the Glencairn 10. Next question, trying to get a bourbon friend into Scotch. What are your top 3 non-peated recommendations? So I think with bourbon, people into bourbon, it's a little bit of a sweeter spirit. You got more sort of caramelly notes. So I'm going to lean towards something that isn't going to be so farmy, so malty, and a little bit more in that lighter style. What I would say is probably one of my favorite whiskeys to introduce people to Scotch is the Dalwhinnie 15. Look, it's not going to be like a punchy Scotch, but that's not the point. Another one would be the Oban 14. This has a nice like coastal note, but it also has this nice like undertone of caramel notes to it as well that I think a lot of bourbon lovers might enjoy. A third whiskey, the Arran 10, and I know a lot of bourbon lovers love the Arran 10. So what is the best whiskey to gift at Father's Day? I got this question a lot, so I've had to change up my scenery because I don't want the whole video to be about this question. So I'm going to show you quickly, so make sure you're watching. And I think anything from my recent video, the $300 whiskey collection, will work really well. You got sherried, smoky, a beginner one, a cask strength one. But I think if you've got a little bit more budget, a whiskey I often recommend is this one here, the Glenmorangie Signet, because it's got a lot of theatre to it, opening it, and it also tastes great. But it does come with that higher price tag. But what if the person you're buying for already has a ton of whiskies and you've got no idea if they already have some of the whiskies I just talked about? So a lot of people who buy whiskies for me say how intimidating it is to buy for a whiskey geek, and I bet a ton of you in the same boat. But what's kind of perfect though, is that some of you were asking what my EDC is. What's my everyday carry? The thing is, the thing I carry around every day, I think would make a perfect alternative to buying whiskey. And what's perfect is they also are today's sponsor, and that's Ridge. Let me tell you about Ridge. So they make these awesome wallets, which are my kind of wallet, because I hate clutter, and these fit perfectly in your front pocket, and they can hold up to like 12 cards and some cash too. And the cool thing is they come in over 50 colors. I got this nice leather one, which just feels really great. And their key cases, these are game changers. I got this nice carbon fiber one. It's high quality, feels like it's built to last. The thing is, my keys are normally like a noisy mess, and not anymore. Here's the thing though, they actually have a massive deal going on at the moment. If you use my link, you can get up to 40% off for a limited time. So just head over to ridge.com/first fill. The link's also in the description. So if you have no idea what to buy for Father's Day, I think Ridge is an awesome alternative. And thanks to Ridge for sponsoring this video. Okay, got this question. What alternatives are you excited about recently? So I've been trying to explore a little bit more bourbon because it really is Yeah, for people into whiskey, it is the other whiskey that this kind of goes unexplored. I picked these up recently. The two Mitches single barrel. You guys in the US will know a lot more about them, but I'm really enjoying it. Like, I didn't think I was a rye person. The sour mash, really liking this too, especially in summer over a big ice cube is great. Question, do you think more distilleries should be as transparent as Compass Box? Yes. Brian asked, what is the best alternative to Springbank Distillery? And you can't say Kilkerran. The whiskey I kind of substitute for a Springbank would either be Glenallachie. It's got that sort of heavy oiliness that you get in Springbank. But the one Whiskey and I on our video together decided on was the Benromic Distillery, especially the cask strength, but also just some of their special releases like the 46% Contrast series. So the next question is, what's your go-to whiskey for hot weather and summer? I always think some of the best summer whiskey is actually Indian whiskey. It always has this nice tropical note. The Rampur is a great example. This is the double cask. This one here, the Injury, fantastic as well. Really nice, summery, tropical whiskey. So the next question is, if you had to pick one whiskey region of Scotland to drink forever, which one would it be? So this is a really interesting question. If I wanted more smoky whiskies, I could pick Islay. If I wanted more sherry cask whiskies, maybe Speyside. But I think I'd want diversity in the region so I can try lots of different things. And I think I'd have to go with the unofficial region of the islands. You can get lots of light whiskies like Arran, Tobermory. You can also get lots of peated whiskies, Lag, the Lacheg, Talisker, Toravaig. And I think there's just a lot of interesting things happening on the islands at the moment. Do you have any favorite whiskey cocktails? My favorite whiskey cocktail is the old fashioned. I love it. Especially for a lot of you who drink whiskey neat. I feel like this is the closest to drinking neat in a cocktail because all you're doing is getting a little bit of bitters, something sweet like sugar syrup and some orange peel. The great thing about the old fashioned is it covers all the bases. It's sweet, it's sour and bitter all in one. This question asks, what are the main taste differences between Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey and what do they come from? I always find Scotch whiskey has a little bit more of that kind of maltiness, and you know, you get a lot of peaty scotches as well. Irish whiskey, you often get that sort of shortbread note. It's a little bit lighter. This is just a generalization though, because there are single malts now from Ireland, but historically, you know, Irish whiskey, you're going to be a mixture of malted barley and unmalted barley. And a lot of Irish whiskies are triple distilled. Just means that the whiskey is going to come out a little bit lighter. What impact does climate, temperature, humidity, etc. make on the whiskey aging process? So I definitely think there is an impact of climate on whiskey, and it's mainly through the casks. So when a cask is in a warehouse, depending on how cold the nights are, how hot the days are, the variation of temperature from summer to winter, or just overall how cold or how warm it is, will change how the spirit matures in that cask. So I'd say for like somewhere in Scotland, if you're comparing two Speyside distilleries, it's going to be kind of minimal because the weather's the same, the seasons will be the same. Really the differences between those whiskies will come down to the cask type and the still. But if you compare country to country where the weather's vastly different, say India to Scotland. In India, the cask is breathing a lot faster because it's warmer. In those longer countries, there can be a lot of variation just within the country. The top of New Zealand, it's kind of subtropical. At the bottom, it snows in the winter. And so this difference is why I don't like comparing age statements from, say, Scotland to other countries around the world, because a 10-year-old in New Zealand is not going to be like a 10-year-old in Scotland. Okay, questions from Discord. If you haven't joined my Discord yet, make sure you click the link down below. Amy asked, what would be your dream whiskey experience? I think I really want to go to Tasmania at the moment, explore those Australian whiskies. Tasmania is, yeah, it's apparently beautiful. I haven't been there. There's lots of distilleries. This question said, which part of the whiskey making process makes a liquid more chewy and oily? Is it due to how many times it gets distilled? How many times it gets distilled can play a part, but I really think the shape of the still plays the biggest part. If you have a big fat still, there's less reflux. Often that will give you a more oily, heavier whiskey. Of all the distilleries you have visited, are there any you would want to visit again? And if so, which ones would you want to the most? Look, I've been to Speyside distilleries, I've been to Islay distilleries, but I love visiting Cardrona. They've just got a great location for a distillery. And it means you can go during ski season and you cross the road and there's a distillery right there. So you're given unlimited funding for a distillery. Where do you put it? Home, Scotland? Where region-wise? Where more specifically amongst romantic hills or a childhood river? Get freaky with it. Freaky with it. I would love to put a distillery in the Lofoten Islands in Norway. That would just be perfect for a distillery. You got the cold temperatures like Scotland. You're also surrounded by big mountains. You got these cool little cabins. It's an epic place. Great question here. Should Scotch whiskey prices continue to rise more and more? Do you see yourself shifting to cheaper bottles in the same category, purchase similar bottles but fewer of them, or gradually switch over to different spirit categories like blended Scotch, rum, Armagnac, etc.? This is a great question. I'm definitely switching more to non-age statement whiskies. I can get better value. I can't tell you the last time I bought an 18-year-old whiskey. I used to have quite a few. So that's something that's changed. Blended whiskies, definitely. When whiskies come out like the Macallan's Nose, this is fantastic. This was only like $67 in New Zealand, which is crazy. So I'll be buying more whiskies like this. If more distilleries can release great value but complex whiskies, that's the direction I'm going for sure. Jeff Whiskey, who I did that design whiskey video with, go watch that. And so he's asked thoughts on the Glenallachie rebrand. I would say I'm more in the camp of I like it. I think it's better. I think the old font had this kind of Flintstones font to it. I feel like the new font is something, it's just better than the Flintstones thing. I do think it's a very safe rebrand though. I know some people thought Ben Romick went too left field rather than keeping some of the old design, but I like they kind of went all out and changed it completely. And that's probably the camp I'd land in. I feel like Glenallachie could have gone a step further and done something really different, but I can see that for passionate fans of Glenallachie, they had to kind of split the difference and do something in the middle that kind of looks like the old bottles, but it's just a really good update. This question said, did you ever taste a Dutch whiskey? And if yes, what was it? If no, something on your wish list. I did. One of you guys sent me a Dutch whiskey, I think Daniel Williams, and this is fantastic. Cask strength, clay whiskey. It's only 3 years old, but it's one of the best 3-year-old whiskies I've ever had. I really like that it's a screw top. Okay, this question comes from Sean. He said another great topic to look into was one of investing in whiskey barrels. This kind of investment is gaining more and more traction versus other traditional ways of investing. Maybe worth an entire video on its own. Yeah, I think the Whiskey Baron actually did a really interesting video on this. I'll link it up here if it lets me link it. Yeah, it talks about there are some concerns in whiskey cask investment. It's not something I do because there have been a lot of cases where things have gone wrong and a lot of people have been ripped off. But then like some distilleries will just sell casks, and I think that's fine. If you and a few buddies want to get together and buy a cask and drink it later down the road, that's great. The more investment side, are you just buying it to make money later? I'm pretty skeptical about that. Okay, so this question comes from a Patreon. If you want to join me on Patreon, link in the description. It's where I post extra content and other Q&As. I often do Q&As every so often. This is only the second one I've done on the channel. So if you want more of that, if you want to ask me more questions, if I missed your question, do join me over in Patreon. But here Andrew said, Scotches are most commonly in ex-bourbon cask or sherry cask, which again is mostly Oloroso. What type of non-common cask are you noticing works well? What bottles or distillery do you recommend that seems to be doing it right nowadays with releasing some non-ex-bourbon and non-ex-sherry casks? This is a really good question, Andrew. I think my two favorite non-sherry cask, non-ex-bourbon cask whiskies, although most of them will start their maturation off in ex-bourbon casks, would be Madeira and Rioja. I really like those casks. I think they work really well. And maybe Saltern as well. Some of the Madeira casks, Kilchoman does a great Madeira cask. The Lachag Sinclair series, aged in a red wine Rioja cask, which is from Spain. I really enjoy those. Okay, this question comes from Joe. He said, what's the best Macallan alternative? So Macallan, as many people know, is very expensive these days. There's a lot of premiumization within it. These days, people are wanting something similar to a Macallan, but without the large price tag. The one I generally recommend to people is from the Tamdhu Distillery. You still got a really nice, beautiful bottle. So you got that same like theatre when you open this bottle with people. It's solely aged in sherry casks. So Macallan often is aged in sherry casks. They have a very good sherry cask supply chain. And Tamdhu's the same. Have you ever tasted any Brazilian whiskey? No, I haven't, but send me some. I'd like to. Paul said, of all the Scotch distilleries, which would be your top 5 to visit? Top 5 to visit, that's tough. I would say Brasse, Spayburn, that now that it's open, I'd love to go there. And that distillery looks beautiful. Isle of Harris would be really interesting. Springbank, and I'd love to go to Port Ellen when it reopens. Besides whiskey, what other hobbies do you have? Whiskey was my hobby, and I've kind of turned it into, it still is my hobby. It kind of turned into a job, but it's not my full-time job. It's kind of a half hobby at the moment. Also was into photography, landscape photography, but with 2 kids, I don't do so much of, landscape photography these days. So I got into a few other things. Actually, I forgot one of my hobbies I've just got into recently. It's running, trying to get fit again. I used to be quick when I was younger, not as quick now. So if you're on Strava, you should come follow me over there. Sort of balancing out my whiskey with exercise. Okay, so this next question says, what is your favorite whiskey you have bought lately and why? I've really enjoyed the Cape Byron from Australia, single malt. This is the one that Jim McEwen helped put together, and it's non-chill filtered, no added color. That's all on the label. It's 47%. This is really good Australian whiskey. I feel like if you're in Australia and you can get hold of one single malt, this is probably the favorite one I've had so far. I feel like your videos a lot. What's your opinion on chill filtered whiskey? I did a whole video on this. Go watch it. How has your journey been? I was first an Isla fan, then heavy sherry, and now more bourbon barrels with some peat. This is why I sometimes struggle to recommend whiskies, because it depends where you are in your journey. If you asked me when I first got into whiskey what my favorite whiskey was, it would have been Lafroig 10. As my journey went on, I hardly drink any of it. So then I got into like cask strength whiskies. I just wanted full power whiskies. Then I came around to more of a blend between ex-bourbon cask and sherry cask whiskies. Think of like the Longmorn 16, Anarch 18. It's a balance between the 2 casks. These days, I'm going for 2 extremes. Light, delicate, but complex whiskies, Glencairn 10, the Lindors. And I'm also going for things that are kind of just everything. Full flavour. Stuff like the Ben Romick Contrasts Peat Smoke Sherry Cask whiskies. 5 Scotch bottles you absolutely must replace from your stash every time it's empty. This is a fantastic question and a tough question, because I think this probably would change week to week, but I'll give you 5. For your peaty whiskey, Port Charlotte 10, love it. As long as the price doesn't go up too far, I'm going to keep buying that whiskey. Glenallachie, if you want something a little bit more funky, heavier, oilier. Glencairn 10, all of you know. Burnhaven 12. And this one, probably not consensus among a lot of whiskey enthusiasts, but I really enjoy the Glengoyne cask strength. I think Glengoyne is one of the most fantastic spirits, but often there's some of the higher age statement whiskies are just so expensive that some of us whiskey geeks get put off. But I still think they make great liquid. As soon as this runs out, I'll be buying another. What is one aspect of Scotch whiskey or whiskey in general that you think is underappreciated in the whiskey community? I think a lot of people focus on the cask type, if it's smoky, whiskey regions is really focused on. I don't think too many people put focus on the shape of the still. And I think this is what's really interesting that you need to know if you do visit a distillery, because the shape of a still makes a huge difference to how the whiskey tastes. If you want to learn about that, go watch my stills video. This question asks, why are you primarily a Scotch enthusiast? What is it about Scotch that is not present in other spirits? Irish, bourbon, cognac. So this is a big question I always get all the time. Why are you not talking much about bourbon? Why do you like Scotch better? I find Scotch has a wider diversity of flavor than other spirits. If this was the diversity of Scotch, I feel like bourbon is this, because bourbon has to be aged in new oak barrels. They can't experiment with cask types. And with Scotch, right, like on my shelf, you've got smoky whiskies, sherried whiskies, spirit forward ex-bourbon cask whiskies. You've got whiskies that are aged in wine casks, rum casks. I just feel like there's a lot of diversity going on. There's heavy whiskies, there's light whiskies. It never feels like you've completed your whiskey journey. There's always more to explore. And I think that's what I love about it. I like exploring the unknown. So many other great questions, but if I included them, the video would just be way too long. But if you want to ask more specific questions to me, if I missed your question, you can go ask over at Patreon, where I do regular Q&As and extra content. And also, those are the people that help support this channel and keep this channel growing. So do jump over there or become a member. You get cool emojis too. But thanks again to my patrons for making this video possible, and share and enjoy. Beauty.